Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us for this episode of Demystifying Money. I'm your host, Misty Lynch, and today I'm joined by my friend Saleema Vellani. She is the CEO of Ripple Impact and the author of Innovation Starts with I. Saleema, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you so much for having me on your show.
I would love for you to explain to our listeners what Ripple Impact is all about and how you kind of got your start as an entrepreneur and ended up in this space.
All right, well, I'll start with the second question. So I actually got my footing in entrepreneurship at the age of 21. I could not find a job. My whole goal was to work at a lifelong sort of company, is what my parents instilled in me, was go get security and a stable job. And when I graduated in 2008 in the crisis, that was not my reality. And so I actually ended up moving to Brazil to do volunteer work and help build a language school for an orphanage. I was basically an entrepreneur implementing an idea of a founder, a Dutch director of the orphanage who was like, we need to make more money and keep the orphanage alive. And so I was the person on the ground to set up the school and like go through all the pivots to get the school to be profitable. It's still in Rio. It's a private school now. It's the number one school in Rio. The orphanage shut down, unfortunately, but it's still doing a lot of social impact and impact focused programming. And that was my experience on the ground learning entrepreneurship. And after that, I moved to Italy. That's a love story. It's all in my book. So you can always check out my book for the full story. Innovation Starts with I. But I moved to Italy, couldn't find a job. It was now the Greek and Euro crisis. And I was like, what am I going to do? I was living in Reggio di Calabria. And was walking around with my resume and I was like, hey, I tried cooking Italian food for a day, didn't last there. My Caesar salad and chicken Alfredo skills were useless over there. I tried tutoring. I tried all kinds of things. And ultimately, I was even an MC of a light tenor singer. And it was just really hard living in a place like that where it's not Rome or Venice, but the south of Italy where there's mafia. So I ended up finding work online. My brother was like, why don't you do some translation work and use your languages? And I quickly pivoted into from a translator to what the market wanted was English into other languages and built a whole translation business and was working with global companies to help them go global online through translated websites, translated catalogs, magazines. And myself, my partner, we were basically just killing it. No marketing, no social media, no website. We just had a way to get customers in the door and deliver the work. And so we were market leaders within the online translation space because we were using human translators and we built a remote team back in 2009. So through all those early experiences there's a lot more stories I can tell, but like over the years, I've built different businesses. Some failed, some succeeded and exited, some stalled. And I've learned a lot as an entrepreneur. And I really wanted to give back and help other entrepreneurs because when I moved to the US, I was like, wow, entrepreneurship is cool here. Like people actually want to become entrepreneurs. And for me, it was more, I did it out of survival. And so I was ashamed that I couldn't find a job when I went to grad school. And I was the person that was running a business while in graduate school. And so when I moved here, I was like, oh, this is actually really cool. And then when I did try the 9 to 5 and work in an office and what I thought was stable and a dream job, it really was not that. And I felt my creativity and I felt kind of suffocated and I couldn't bring out my creativity and
Mhm.
all my great ideas. And ultimately, I ended up going back into entrepreneurship a few years later and did a few other businesses. And ultimately in 2020, when the pandemic happened, decided it was time for a pivot. I was doing a lot of speaking around the world, design thinking workshops, leadership workshops. And when the pandemic happened, it all went virtual. I felt like my passion for that was for doing it virtually was not, I kind of lost it. I felt like, when you feel inside of you that it's time for a change, it's time for reinvention. So I was already writing a book on reinvention and I realized, okay, maybe as I write this book to help other people reinvent themselves and reinvent their businesses, it's time for me to go through another reinvention cycle. And so I ended up doing some different research, getting my assistant to interview some of my friends and colleagues to see what they saw as my biggest strengths. I did a lot of the book writing and interviewed 100 people. I went on what I call a 100 coffee challenge to interview all sorts of experts like Ariana Huffington, Alex Osterwalder, who created the business model canvas, and just some amazing people that I got inspiration from and got the book done. And as I was doing that, though, I saw that there was this growing niche of entrepreneurs who were struggling, like a lot of people going into entrepreneurship, but they were struggling to be successful. They went into entrepreneurship so that they could make, decent money, few $100,000 a year. They weren't trying to grow big businesses or even tech startups. They were businesses of one, like solopreneurs or very, very small businesses that are expert businesses, coaches, consultants, that sort of thing, and speakers, authors, etc. They wanted to be known, and they struggled with making the right money that they wanted to have to sustain themselves. They were going through feast and famine cycles. They didn't feel like they were known, and they were having to do different projects here and there and trade their time for money. And their branding needed a lot of work in terms of strategy, and their entire positioning needed help. And so they were thinking like, hey, like I can't figure this out. I have all this fragmented talent. I have all these coaches and programs and cookie cutter here and a freelancer, a designer here. And they're like, I have all these things, but I'm still not successful. And so I was like, well, let me see how I can help. And so I started coaching a lot of them, even before the pandemic. And it was only during the pandemic I did all that research and was like, well, I think based on the feedback I'm getting, they're like, hey, Saleema, like your strategies are great, but like we don't have a team like you do to execute all of this. How are we supposed to execute on all this marketing if we're not even marketing experts? And then I realized, wow, I need to make a change, and this is going to have to be something bigger. At that point on, I had my small team of 3 or 4. We doubled to support a cohort of women entrepreneurs and help them grow their businesses and figure out what do they want. Ran a beta of a business accelerator, and we're basically helping them with their business strategy, their marketing, their LinkedIn, growing visibility, helping them position themselves as authorities, helping them get more speaking engagements and podcasts, helping them grow their LinkedIn audience, and just helping them make more money and be known. And they'll also be able to sleep better at night, be happier, healthier, and not burn out. And yeah, it went really well. And very soon after, we were, just attracted a lot of different people who wanted to work with us. And we iterated and iterated on our program. And today we've supported at least 100 entrepreneurs who have, most of them, grown their businesses and have been successful through the hands-on help from my team. So the differentiation is that we're hands-on, and we have a lot of emerging market talent. So we can do a lot and deliver a lot of value at a fraction of the cost. So that's what Ripple Impact does today.
That's amazing. And I love that you talked about how you got your start and all of the different types of business, because I think that's one of the things that sometimes is such a struggle for people who either leave corporate and go into entrepreneurship, or they're in entrepreneurship. And that whole thought of, kind of going back and, reinventing what you're doing and looking at what you're doing and seeing what needs to change. And I think that's why a lot of businesses, they might not know how to get to, the next level, or they might just not understand what is not working here. And they might have a wonderful idea that it sounds like everybody wants, and they're really not sure, and it sounds great in their heads. But that whole process of reinvention, I feel like, is so, it's so tied to entrepreneurship, where you might be in a corporate role where you're doing the same thing for your entire career, or there might just not be that certain level of, okay, I need to make some adjustments here. I might need to actually go right back down to the studs and figure out what needs to happen next. So I think that's something that might be hard for people to go through without an outside perspective, or out a coach asking those right questions, because again, our thoughts might just be on loop. So what I'm thinking about those people that you're helping, and the ones that are maybe they're coming out of corporate, or maybe they're really ambitious, they're really ready to go, and they just can't seem to, like you said, be seen or be heard. So what are some of the things that you and your team can do? We'll start with even just the personal branding concept, which some people might not be comfortable with. They might think, well, this is my product, or this is my service. Why would I need a personal brand, period?
Yeah, that's a very normal objection, especially from people coming from corporate, where personal branding feels squirmish to them. And so what we ask them during the call is, well, how do people get to know your product or your business, your program? And they're like, well, through me. And I'm like, well, how do people know you? And they're like, well, I have my Rolodex and whatever. And I'm like, well, what are you going to do 2 or 3 years from now? And they're like, word of mouth, referrals. But I'm like, how do you feel about that strategy? They're like, not great. And they do want to be known, but they're thinking that their product and their business it should be the thing that should be known and not them. And I said, well, usually when you get started, if you're under 500,000 or even under $1 million in revenue, chances are that 99% of the time it's a founder-led product. People are going to work with you and your company because of you and the human behind it, just the way a lot of us make purchases that from smaller businesses because of the relationship, because of the people behind it, especially in the services space. Professional services is very different than product. And so when I ask them those questions, they come to realize that they have to make a mindset shift, that it's not personal branding isn't about self-promotion. It's about helping, ultimately it's about helping people. That's why a lot of us, at least the clients that we work with, they're purpose driven and their whole goal is to help people. So I'm like, if knowing you being known is part of the process of helping people, then can you imagine what influence you can have and what you can attract through your thought leadership? And that's where it's very key. So yes, the personal branding component, we almost don't even use that word because it can sometimes put people off. But what they actually need when they start is clarity. A lot of them think that they're clear. They've got lots of ideas and they haven't built a product roadmap as to how they're going to launch all these ideas over time. And they just want to get it all done ASAP. And I'm like, well, less is more, and you want to focus on less things and focus on those things. Laser focus is key. It's a thing I also am not great at, but I have people on top of me regularly say, Saleema, focus on these 2 or 3 things. We do these things really well. Focus on these strategies. There's lots of stuff out there, but ideas are not great if the execution does not happen. And so clarity and their business vision and their personal vision for themselves, because a lot of times we prioritize our business vision, but at the end of the day, what is the personal vision we have for ourselves and why we went into entrepreneurship? And the business won't be sustainable if it doesn't also align with our personal wants and needs.
That's definitely true. And I know I talked to several people who go into entrepreneurship so they don't have to work 40 hours a week. And then they joke that they're working 80 for themselves or 100 hours a week. And so I think that that is something that a lot of us need to, and I as well, really think about is how I want to be spending my time, where I want my energy to be, what I want really, ultimately from this business. And is it more time with my family? Is it to be able to support, to do certain things? And so that clarity, though, I think it can get very, we can kind of get away from it for a while. And it might be like something that is so important for people to revisit because money and making money is the goal, and making more and more and more. Usually, people are like focused on those numbers. But I think it is really important to have that kind of clarity to see like, okay, well, what do you actually want this business to be? What do you want your life to look like with it? So that's such a good point. And another thing you mentioned when it comes to, clarity and focus, you mentioned like the fragmented things. And I think a lot of times people who are building a business will kind of be reactive, where if somebody needs something, okay, I'll build this, or I'll do this type of, this type of agreement with you, or this service or that service. And they end up having what another guest once called like strip malls of products and services instead of like a skyscraper that's built up with their clients. And so are you seeing that more often, where people are just kind of not not super sure what they should be offering or how they should be promoting things, and they just start to build and keep
Yeah.
creating a million different products and services without
Yeah.
that focus on how to sell one or two really well?
Yeah, definitely. So our ideal client, we do get some that are pre-corporate exit and they want to plan their corporate exit. And a lot of people who are thinking about their finances and thinking about how to make this work and how to future-proof themselves and do scenario planning. But a lot of our clients typically come to us after they've spent the year, I guess, playing, reading books, and like trying to do it themselves and trying all these tactical things, maybe investing in smaller vendors or contractors, thinking like they're gonna, get marketed and sold to some other programs and cookie cutter sort of courses and things that essentially get them a little bit like not really what they actually need or what they were promised, but at least they get some education, but they're picking things up from here and there, and it's not necessarily working for them. And so our best clients are the ones who already have done the feast and famines, who've already tried working with different types of people and fragmented talent. And they're just like, this is not working, but I can't afford to build out my own team right now. And so they're like, I need help. They still have some budget to invest in their business, but they're like, I don't want to be at them. They look at time differently because they're also older. And so they're like, I don't have all the time in the world to figure this out. And they just don't know that something like us exists because our competitors are really all the fragmented people. And so, and nothing against fragmented talent, like there's a lot of great coaches, a lot of great people out there, but when you're trying to get your business off the ground, it can be really hard because the one asset that you cannot get back is time. So yeah, our best clients are the ones that come a little bit later and they're like, okay, I really, really need help.
Yeah, no, I think trying the things, and I think it is important for people, a lot of times when, you don't have the time that maybe you did when you were, 20 and didn't have any other responsibilities or really any, um, you know, maybe you weren't supporting anybody else financially, just for yourself. And so your time and your energy could be spent 100% on a business, which changes. And so I think that's important, especially for people who are struggling to figure it out for yourself, to look at your budget and to think about where you might be able to realign your budget to actually um, make progress. And that might include, certain things like outside help from, another team, or maybe you can look at all the different pieces, all the different people you're paying and kind of look back to like, was this just a reaction to this need, that need, and not really thinking about the business in a holistic way. So it's super
Yeah.
important. And those are all excellent questions that I think that people need to think about and ask themselves, especially if they feel like something isn't working and they want to see changes and they want to see progress. One of the
Yeah.
other things that, we that I think you focus on, and I know that it's something that you do as well, is the professional speaking. And so I think that whole, because I've talked to so many different entrepreneurs, and some of them really have, you know, brilliant ideas and they want to share it with the world, but maybe they don't love social media, or maybe they, COVID, with everything being virtual, they felt like, oh, I'm not able to network or be in front of people anymore. But how have you, you know, how have you adjusted your public speaking, to become an actual lucrative line of business for you, where you're able to travel and make money on it, not just, you know, just use your time and be out there for the exposure. How have you changed and made that, part of your business?
Yeah, great question. So speaking is, I would say, probably the number one thing that has grown my business significantly and got us to close to seven figures just within 2 years of starting. And it's also because I aligned it with my book. It wasn't actually planned that way, but it turned out that way. And now we teach that as a strategy because it worked out really well. And I was speaking a lot before COVID. I was getting paid to speak. I was doing a lot of keynoting. I was doing a bunch of workshops. And so the model was I was usually getting paid to go and speak on different stages. But that slowly changed because when the pandemic hit, just, speaking became a bit of there was just a higher supply of speakers. The demand was still pretty high, but because the supply went up of speakers and a lot of people just hustling to get work, and it basically, like, things changed. And so 10 or 15 or even 20 years ago, you could get paid a lot of money to go fly somewhere and speak. And that was the golden years. But like now it's very different. A lot of people are competing for the same oxygen. And so what's going on is you have to pick your track. Like, you can't be it all. So I was a speaker A type, on the speaker A track, which is you're doing the keynote speaking, you're traveling, you're getting paid. It is a main source of your revenue. I was always doing other things like consulting, coaching, etc. But yeah, speaking was pretty good back in those days. But when COVID happened, you really had to be strategic. Are you going to be doing the speaker A track when, after the world recovers? And are you going to do the traveling and go the speaker circuit? Do you have the personality? Do you have the actual product, a really good keynote for that? Because a lot of people are like, oh, I love my keynote and I get good feedback, but ultimately I'm not getting enough bookings. How do I market myself to get more bookings? And I'm like, well, if you have a good product and your keynote is amazing, then it would market itself, because then you would have referrals and people lining up after you speak. And, I've spoken at Inbound a couple of times in the same conference. Like, I've done a lot of different gigs, and generally, like, after I've spoken, especially later on, as I matured and I improved my keynote, there was always a bunch of people that would line up and ask me, how do we work together? Or what do you do that, how could could I book you to my next conference, or can I make an introduction? And so just my very first speaking gig on stage led to my multiple paid engagements and multiple opportunities. And it compounds from there. So that's the speaker A track, where you're doing speaking for a living. I moved to the speaker B track, which is essentially using speaking to grow my business. And that's where you're not focused on generating revenue from speaking and trading your speaking for a fee, but rather speaking in front of a strategic audience where you are generating leads for your business, or speaking to your audience where you could, facilitate a workshop or whatever, and coaching, consulting as well. But you're It's more about the bigger product or what your business does and not just you speaking. And so, yeah, there's different tracks for speaking. And it's usually between those two that people pick. A lot of people are like, well, I want to do it all. And I'm like, well, the roadmap for a speaker A and doing the keynote track is very different than speaker B. So you can say both, but then you're probably not going to end up with much. Or you pick a track and focus on that track. But with my business, what happened was I was doing a lot. I was bundling a lot of my speaking engagements with bulk books, like for example, hundreds of ebooks with the speaking engagement or a fireside chat. I had different book and speaking packages in my media kit. And so I was selling a lot of those. People were just asking, hey, can you speak here? I'm like, well, if we have these different book promotion or book tour packages. And so, yeah, and I also organized with some certain anchors and sponsors and partners a bunch of book tours. So I spoke in all over Dubai at the Expo, the Women Business Council, many different places. I spoke at companies in Oman at the university, the Innovation Park, like lots of different places in Colombia, El Salvador, Mexico, and a lot of organic gatherings as well. Just people hosted salon type dinners, and those were honestly some of the best ones. But yeah, I spoke around the country here in the US. As much as I could because of the pandemic and Omicron and whatever was going on when I launched. But it was really building those relationships and making that impact and touching people through my story, through my message. You touch people in a way so that they actually strategically with your thought leadership, so they feel, oh, I feel connected and I want to understand more about what she does and work with her. And that's generally how we were able to generate a ton of leads in the early days through the book.
That's great. And I think for those people who maybe, haven't written a book, but maybe they write on their own website. Are there ways that you think that some people who do want to get on stages or they want to do these workshops or maybe be invited to these things, how can they start to build out their thought leadership using, either social media or other ways that they can do that while they're maybe putting together a book? Or do you recommend that people do go the route of becoming a published author to, really kind of amplify their message and their authority?
Yeah, so there's a bunch of juicy advice I'll give. So first off, positioning yourself as an author goes a long way as a speaker. That's your proof of expertise. That's your thought leadership. That could be a tool for your clients. It could be just a positioning tool. But essentially, and there's lots of different strategies. Do you want an actual good quality book? Or are you just doing this as a business card? Is this something that you'll use as a tool for your workshop attendees or different strategies with the book? But essentially, what you want to do is, yeah, position yourself as an author, put the launch date out 2025 or 2026, push it out at least 2 years so that you have that accountability. Don't worry, put a working book cover. We do this for our clients, put a working book cover on your banner, on your assets, get people excited, bring people into the journey that you're going on this journey as an author. Don't promise when it exactly will be delivered, but a vague date in the future. And the book title, it's a working book. So you're an author when you decide to write a book and start the process, not when you're published. When you're published, you're a published author. And so a lot of people think you're only an author after you're published. And I say, no, like you should start marketing your book and your thought leadership from the early days and test content to see what people are actually interested in. A lot of people are like, well, I want to write on this. And I'm like, are you writing this as a passion project or is this for your business? Our folks do it because of their business. I'm like, well, then you got to really figure out what people want, what the market wants, and how do people see you and your expertise and what value can you bring? And so interestingly, through the research I did going on that 100 coffee challenge, which I highly recommend, and I have a tool for that as well. I can add it to the show links. But essentially going and talking to people and having really open-ended conversations. You can target some different groups, but essentially just having great conversations with people even outside of your industry. You can connect dots in new ways, you get inspiration, you can get other people's stories and not make the book just about you, but really, try to make it valuable for the audience that you're targeting. And you're going to go through some course corrections and some pivots, but essentially, yes, positioning yourself as an author helps you basically fast track as a speaker. Also, yeah, there's different ways to succeed as a speaker. And if you're thinking about it, definitely the positioning is important and then having some of the basics, but it's not just about the checkbox of the speaker reel, the speaker website, or the speaker one sheet. And it is really about the product. And a lot of people just think it's pulling a presentation together and memorizing the talk. It's a lot more than that. You really have to refine that product and do it several times. It's about those reps and getting those repetitions in and refine it and get the feedback to improve the product. If the product is good, you're booked as a speaker, and speaker bureaus will be all over you. But if you don't have a solid product yet, then practicing and getting those reps in, you should be increasing your fee based on the amount of reps that you're doing and not just because you think that you're this much worth. And so that's important to know as well. Pricing is a whole nother strategy, but yeah.
No, that's great. And I like that, when it comes to being an author, because I talk to a lot of people that know that I wrote a book and they want to write a book and they're curious about it and they've thought about it. And it has been one of those things that is pushed out every year and it never happens. And so I think that that's good to kind of, once you get people involved, like once I told people I was writing a book, once I had them help me pick out the cover, like all of those things were kind of like, it's just, I feel like with any goal, like if you tell people you're doing it, it just kind of holds you a little bit more accountable than if you're like, someday I'm going to do this. So I think that's a great tip. And like, you're right, really, there is no, like, it's not like you get hired and you're not, it's basically when you decide that you're going to be doing it. So that's really good to know for people out there who have had that dream or have that on their list for a long time, that it is useful and it is helpful. Now being, making a lot of money off of your book is probably difficult, but I think what you're saying is using that book to open doors and get you on, on different stages or in front of people, or to be able to, did having a book or writing a book help you get those 100 coffee dates that you were going after? Or how did you actually get people to actually accept that? You mentioned some really, some big names that sat down and spoke with you that I think a lot of people would wonder, like, but how would we even get the attention of somebody that we wanted to interview?
Interesting. I would do it totally different now. Like I
Hmm.
got Adam Grant, Seth Godin, not interviewed, but I had them endorse the book. Dan Pink, lots of great people. And that was what I learned through pitching and how do you pitch to get those types of interviews, et cetera. But and I use that for endorsements, but that was after the publication. That was like already when I was about to
Hmm.
publish. But earlier on, when I started the book back in 2019, I wasn't known. I didn't have a platform. People only knew me through speaking. Like I had a small platform of people that knew me through speaking engagements or whatever, but I wasn't that active on LinkedIn. I didn't have clarity on my audience, how people saw me. Um, and yeah, because I wasn't known, I couldn't go after the big, the household names. And so I started with just people at organizations. I did try with Alex Osterwalder. I did get some bigger names because I tried from their websites, but those were like one-offs. And I was like, I'm not going to focus on that as my strategy. I talked to CSR experts, I talked to digital transformation experts, leadership, like all sorts of different people that I actually sent out a lot of messages. And whoever felt like they were interested in my book concept, I sent them a one-pager about the book. If they felt they were excited about what I was going to write about, innovation starts with I, they would set up a coffee. It was all automated. And like, I just had people booking coffees with me or like these interviews, and they were excited to share. Like people really like, first of all, they like flattery when someone's impressed with their work. Second of all, they like when they can actually just spend an hour talking about themselves and their story. And it's interesting. I just asked them questions like, what inspires you to do what you do? And it was nice to build a rapport and build a relationship. And a lot of those people ended up becoming either future customers, even though I didn't have Ripple Impact back in those days. A lot of them ended up being collaborations or invited me to the book tour, invited me on, book tour events and all sorts of different things, sponsors. Just a lot of different things came out of that because of planting seeds and building that relationship, but also people feeling like they're invested in this baby that's going to be birthed and coming on that journey early on, whereas most authors wait until very close to their book launch to start marketing. And they think it's just going to blow up and all this success, but it's all about planting those seeds from early on.
It's that's such good advice. And it's so true. And I think that there's a lot of a lot of times we'll keep those big projects close because we don't want anyone to say like, that's not a really good idea or don't do that. And so I think that kind of ripping off the Band-Aid and letting people know what you're doing right away, getting people's input and collaboration, asking questions to even see what people would be curious about, what they talk about, what lights them up. Because you also mentioned before talking to people outside of your industry, which sometimes can feel like an echo chamber, especially when, when I'm reading, financial, experts and I'm reading, the things from personal, like I'm reading it from my lens and not necessarily somebody who's maybe curious about the topic, but not really either not doesn't have a traditional education in it, or maybe it's something new to them. And so it's really interesting to think about like those people who you'd want to reach and what their questions are and what their thoughts are. So I love that idea of just putting out, the invites, seeing who will sit and talk with you, being open to it. And those things, take time and energy, but it sounds like that was a very valuable thing to do when it came down to learning and building something big.
Yeah, I learned a lot about myself through that process and got validation for my thoughts for the book and what I wanted to do. And then I think in some way, subconsciously, it inspired me to build Ripple Impact because I realized I was really good at the whole, book marketing, building a personal brand and growing my audience and building relationships and all of that, though I didn't see that at all at the time. And I didn't know the pandemic was going to happen. So
Yeah. No, and you mentioned before you were talking about, your I know you just launched a newsletter on LinkedIn. Tell me a little bit about LinkedIn. I think there's some people that love it and hate it, but I know a lot of times it is very valuable when it comes to building the business relationship. So how have you used that particular platform
yeah.
to successfully grow Ripple?
Sure. So if you are in the services industry, then LinkedIn is where you should be spending 95% of your marketing efforts because a lot of times we think, oh, Instagram is like fun and it's creative and it's beautiful and it's easy. But like honestly, LinkedIn is where the money's at. That's where you have check writers. That's where you've got people that are professionally networking to do business with each other. And it's just incredible what you can do. And you can also still leverage it a lot more because right now it's harder to use Facebook and Instagram unless you're doing paid ads and stuff like that. It's really difficult to grow just organically. Like it used to be much easier, 10 years ago. But today it's harder. And so LinkedIn still has, it's maturing, but there's still a lot of opportunities. I launched my newsletter less than 24 hours ago and I already have almost 2,000 subscribers. And it's incredible how people, it's just, they help market you. And then, yeah, I have a whole free masterclass I'm happy to share as well in the show links on how to leverage LinkedIn to grow your platform. But you can do a lot on LinkedIn, but you have to think about what is LinkedIn for? Because if you have a primary and secondary audience, let's just say you are Misty targeting, you want to work with entrepreneurs or small business owners on their finances, then you have one sort of positioning for that. But if you also want to speak at conferences and be known as a speaker, then you have your secondary audience, and then you have to hit a broader market. So you have to really know how to position yourself strategically so that you can target no more than two audiences, but ideally one, where it's very clear, like your positioning is targeted towards a specific audience. So you're building your platform. You also want to know exactly how to post content with LinkedIn's algorithm because you can't be promotional. There's certain things that you can follow in order to get more reach and more views on your content. LinkedIn wants you to start conversations essentially. And they also right now value a lot of, their algorithm prioritizes knowledge and advice. And so the more value that you're giving to your community, the more visibility they'll give you in the algorithm. So it's very, very different than other networking platforms, and there's just a lot that you can do. Yeah, my newsletter, it's just launched yesterday. I'll be publishing insights. It's called Authority Insights. It's a lot of different resources, tips, advice for people who are trying to grow their authority and grow their visibility, whether you're a founder, you're an entrepreneur, you're a CEO, you're the face of your business and want to drive more business towards your actual company, or you're a company of one and you are the person that does it all and you need to drive leads towards you and you just want to engage with your community. It's a way to give value to your audience and help people get to know about your thought leadership and what you have to offer.
I think, yeah, and it's great points that you mentioned about that because I do think some of us, we go on there and we connect with somebody and then we're instantly, sent, a pitch. And so I think the fact that they're looking to grow knowledge, advice, start conversations. I think that there are certainly things that we can do to, use the platform. So that's great. And, and definitely with the masterclass, I think that's so valuable because again, if you don't have a huge budget and you're trying to build this, like these are certain tools that you can use. And I mean, with your newsletter, having, that many subscribers just in 24 hours, that's really not that easy to do in any other way besides, what we have available to us with social media. So I think it's a really smart thing for business owners, entrepreneurs, people who are trying to even, just kind of break into an industry to use properly to make those connections and to grow. So I love that idea. I think it's definitely, like you said, the other platforms might be prettier where you want to spend more time. But if that's where the people who are booking speakers, writing checks, getting business, done, that's definitely the place to be. So definitely a great idea there. I'd love to hear a little bit more, before we wrap up, just kind of about, what you feel like is next. Like who, you mentioned the people that are, kind of those entrepreneurs that are kind of getting a little stuck, that are looking to move forward. But, what are some of the things like, can you talk about something, maybe a success story or something that Ripple has done or something that you've worked on with a client that some people might relate to, that can really show, what this kind of relationship can do to help somebody who needs that different level of support?
Sure. So interestingly, one of our earlier clients, her name's Shannon Talbot. She just launched. The reason I'll mention her is because you should totally follow her and buy her book. Her name is Shannon Talbot. And we met back in 2021 through a community, and she was just really stuck in her business. She had exited from corporate a couple years prior and decided she was going to go on this business path. She was thinking about launching a group program of sorts, but we were like, well, let's take a look, because she had her company as, I think it was branded as Path to Presence. And she was hiding under this company brand as one person. At the end of the day, people worked with her because of her. And she was struggling to make the revenue she wanted to make. She was struggling to be known. She was just feeling all over the place and didn't have a roadmap and direction to help her get to her goals, and just working like crazy. And she has a whole burnout story as to why she went into this work, but she found herself spending a lot of time trying to get her business off the ground and not getting the results, working a lot with the fragmented talent that I mentioned. So we had a conversation and she was like, this feels like what I need. And she signed up for our business accelerator. And again, we have a pretty rigorous screening process today. And but back then she seemed like the ideal client for us. And so we took her on, and yeah, she's had a lot of success. She basically got a 50% response rate when she was doing the lead generation. She loved the business strategy element of our program because it helped her feel more confident. One thing that she says in her testimonial is just the fact that we told her, hey, you're already successful. And that helped her, just go further and be driven to continue the journey and do things more strategically. She was able to meet her 2022 financial goals within the first quarter of 2022. During her program with us, she had much better assets. We pivoted her whole mindset on personal branding because she wanted to be this company brand, and we told her why she needs to be a personal brand and own it, especially because her goals were to speak and be known and share her thought leadership, and she wanted to do more speaking and less coaching. And yeah, the book was an idea, and she was just like, it's on my bucket list. And I'm like, well, if you want to speak, let's do a working book cover and use that on your assets, and start getting it out there and starting the journey. And she now published her book, just 2 years later, and it came out last week. It's called Breaking Free. And she's a wellness speaker and a performance coach. And yeah, she's been very successful and has grown her business 50% each year. So that's an example. We have lots of different stories, but I would say that one is one of my favorites, just because it's nice to see 2 years later how much she's grown.
Yeah, absolutely. Because I think, some people think, especially, like if you are focused, there's so much you can do in such a quick, even like, looking back, like, when she probably looks back 2 years ago, it's probably unrecognizable to think about how, when you started to where you're at, if you actually do kind of get that clarity and that focus, and you're able to accomplish so many things. Some people might think it might take 10 years to write a book, and it certainly doesn't have to, but that's so good to hear. And also, I think it's important to think about those things like the business brand versus a personal brand. Who actually needs to be out there, talking, or what are people going to remember or think about? And that's a wonderful story that she's actually been able to have so much success and to hit the financial goals. I love in the first quarter. That's a wonderful thing to know. But the most important thing I think that you said was that you told her she was already successful. So
Yeah.
many of us think that success is out there. It's when I get to this, but it's not now. It's not, it's kind of like that target that continuously moves away and further out. So I think once you actually decide or define how success is for you, and some people who can feel that they're successful now, I think that's very empowering, to be able
Totally.
to then take that next step or make changes, to not have to feel like, okay, well, I can't I can't fail. I can't do that. It's really one of those things that I think was really important to remember. Well, thank you so much for joining me today. I love talking. I would, you mentioned a few things, that we'll put in the show notes for sure, but please tell people how they could find you if they want to subscribe to your newsletter, or where's the best place to follow you and to learn more about you and Ripple, or grab a copy of Innovation Starts with I.
Oh, thank you. Yeah. So Innovation Sources I, it's on Amazon. You can find it. I actually just launched the audiobook a couple months ago. So you can get any type of format on Amazon. You could also follow me on LinkedIn. That's where I'm most active. I'm on other platforms too with my name, Saleema Vellani, but LinkedIn is where I share most of my content and insights. You can just subscribe to my LinkedIn newsletter. That's also probably the best place to stay in the loop. And yeah, my personal website, salimavellani.com, and rippleimpact.com is my company's website. So thank you very much for having me on the show.
Thank you. Thank you so much for joining, and thank you everyone for listening. I'll be sure to include that in the notes. And if you're looking at your business and your budget and you're trying to figure out where you have some room maybe to invest in yourself, head over to mistylynch.com. I would love to help you take a look at that and see if there's any spaces where we can maybe increase the budget to get you to grow at an even faster rate. Thank you so much for joining, and we'll talk again next week.